How did Sonic go from this to this? Sonic the Hedgehog is a franchise that has been around for decades, and with Sonic X Shadow Generations dropping in October and the third movie in the cinematic universe dropping in December, I thought now would be as good a time as any to go through the history of this franchise. Sonic the Hedgehog was released on both the Mega Drive and Master System / Game Gear in 1991 as the game to kick off the series. The main objective of the game was to stop Dr. Robotnik from taking over the world and obtaining the Chaos Emeralds. It differed from most platformers of the time because Sonic was quick on his feet and had this fancy thing called momentum, where rolling down hills made you gradually pick up speed. The game was a roaring success and was the first ever franchise to rival the Super Mario series by Nintendo, which is why Sega would attempt to build on that initial success with Sonic Eraser and Waku Waku Sonic Patrol Car. Following the success of the first game, its sequel, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, was released a year later on the Mega Drive and Master System / Game Gear. The plot was just as simple as the first game: stop Robotnik from using the power of the emeralds to power up the Death Egg. It introduced new concepts and characters, including Miles Tails Prower, the 7th Chaos Emerald, Super Sonic, and the Spin Dash technique, which would all become staples of the franchise, and is looked back upon as one of the Bluebird's finest adventures yet. At this point, Sonic was a global icon, and several spin-off titles came out in an attempt to cash in on that popularity. There was Sega Sonic the Hedgehog, an arcade game which introduced Mighty the Armadillo and Ray the Flying Squirrel, Sega Sonic Popcorn Shop, a Japanese exclusive vending machine game where you play a small mini-game while waiting for your popcorn to be microwaved, Sonic Chaos, a 2D side-scroller for the Master System / Game Gear, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, a Puyo Puyo-esque game with a select from Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, the TV show, and Sonic Spinball, a pinball-esque game where you attained some degree of control over Sonic as you attempted to reach the top of the tables. The most substantial release that year, however, was Sonic CD, released for the Sega CD add-on. This game introduced Amy Rose, Mesosonic, the Super Peel-Out, and was an attempt at making a Metroidvania with Sonic the Hedgehog's mechanics as you fought to save Little Planet from a bad future by either destroying generators located in the past or finding the time stone scattered across the planet. Sega were fully aware of the popularity of the Blue Blur at the time, and several spin-off games were released, including Sega Sonic Cosmo Fighter, a 2D shoot-'em-up featuring Sonic on the Mega Drive, Sonic Drift, a Japanese exclusive kart racer on the Game Gear, Sonic the Hedgehog's Game World in Japan, an educational video game for the Sega Pico, Wacky World's Creativity Studio, a North American exclusive painting program for the Mega Drive, Sonic Triple Trouble, a sequel to Sonic Chaos where Sonic and Tails must recover the Chaos Emeralds and save South Island. However, there were technically two mainline releases that year. The first one was Sonic 3 and the second was Sonic & Knuckles. These were originally meant to be a single game, but due to McDonald's promotional deadline, the games were split in half and sold separately, with a lock-on feature to connect the two games. The combined game, Sonic 3 and Knuckles, once again introduced many things to the series, such as save files, multiple playable characters, in-game cutscenes, Knuckles the Echidna, the Master Emerald, Angel Island, the Super Emeralds, Hyper Forms, and the secret final boss that requires at least one pair of emeralds to access, and is regarded as the best 2D game in the series by many. This period in the series is what I like to call the first Dark Age. Hence I'll skim through these games really quickly as not much of substance was released. Sonic Drift, Game Gear, Knuckles Chaotix, Sega 32X, Tails Sky Patrol, Game Gear, Tails Adventure, Game Gear, Sonic Labyrinth, Game Gear, Sonic the Fighters, Arcade, Sonic Schoolhouse, US only PC, Sonic 3D Blast, Mega Drive and Sega Saturn, Sonic Blast, Game Gear, Sonic Jam, Sega Saturn, Sonic R, Sega Saturn.
Here we go!
After years of filler / experimental games, Sega finally made a transition to 3D with Sonic Adventure, a game that was more narrative driven than anything before it. The premise of the plot was that Dr. Eggman discovers an ancient creature known as Chaos, and our heroes have to stop him from harnessing the full power of the creature. Eventually, Chaos turns on Eggman and absorbs all the negative power of the Chaos Emeralds, prompting Sonic to tap into the positive power of the Emeralds and neutralize them. Naturally, the jump to 3D came with numerous changes and additions, including a full redesign of our main cast, Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Eggman, Amy, to make them look more mature, a full voice cast for these characters, and gameplay styles that differ from the core Sonic gameplay substantially. To this day, it remains one of the most beloved titles in the franchise. A rather uneventful year for the Hedgehog, with only one handheld game being released, Sonic Pocket Adventure for the Neo Pocket Color. This was essentially a proto-Sonic Mania, as it remixed zones from Sonic 2 in a new way while remaining faithful to the original designs. This is the only Sonic game to get a 10 out of 10 from IGN, by the way. Very interesting. After Sonic Shuffle, which is basically Mario Party but with Sonic, underwhelmed on the Dreamcast, Sega released Sonic Adventure 2, which innovated on the 3D formula even further than the original. With a storyline where Sonic is arrested for supposedly stealing a Chaos Emerald, it introduced many new characters that are still fan favourites to this day, including Shadow the Hedgehog and Rouge the Bat, and still is the title a lot of Sonic fans point towards as the ones that got them into the series. However, an enhanced port of Adventure 2 was released on the GameCube a few months later due to the Dreamcast dying a slow death, and was the first game in the series to be released on a Nintendo console, followed by Sonic Advance on the Game Boy Advance. A throwback title to the games of the 90s with the modern aesthetic of the Adventure Era games. Not wanting to rest on their laurels for a second, Sega continued to pump out content for fans non-stop, with Sonic Advance 2 coming out early in the year. It builds upon everything the first game introduced, while putting yet another fresh spin on the 2D Sonic formula with the newly introduced Boost mode. Sonic Adventure would eventually get a port to the GameCube called Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut. It doubled the frame rate, had various texture changes from the original, and included a bunch of Game Gear games as a reward for 100%ing the game. A Sado 3D fighting game was also released in the GBA called Sonic Battle. Not much to it, but it had fantastic characterization and art style. Sonic Advance 3 was also released for the GBA, with a team-up gimmick on top of the various features added in the second game. However, the standout game of that year was Sonic Heroes, the first ever multi-platform release in the series, and the only game where you control 3 characters at the same time to navigate through levels. The story is relatively simple as Metal Sonic decides to go rogue, imprisoning Dr. Eggman and stealing data from all 4 teams to eventually transform into a gigantic clusterfuck with a minute-long transformation. All 4 teams decide to team up, Team Super Sonic defeats Metal Sonic, and the world is saved. This game sold incredibly well, with many loving it and some cultured individuals even falling at the peak of the series. However, things would go downhill for Sonic from here.
You're going straight to hell.
Sonic actually got to a really good start in 05 with the release of Sonic Rush, an evolution of the Sonic Advance 2 style as he used the newly introduced boost to plow through enemies and complete levels of style. It introduced Blaze the Cat, a princess from another dimension, and had a plot where she and Sonic must stop Eggman and Eggman Nega, Blaze's foe, from harnessing the power of the Chaos Emeralds and Soul Emeralds. Again, Blaze is equivalent of the Chaos Emeralds. Unfortunately, this is where the positive vibes fell off the face of the earth, as Shadow got his own game called Shadow the Hedgehog, another multi-platform release. This game has edgy the hedgy, pack heat and used minor curses at almost every chance imaginable, has an awful story and terrible mission structures, changed all the voice actors from the previous era, and is widely considered one of the worst Sonic games ever to this day. I will admit Shadow of a Gun is a pretty cool image, so I'm kinda grateful for that. Oh boy. I think we should start with the positives here. Sonic Riders was released near the beginning of the year and was by far the best thing to come out at the 15th anniversary, with the game being a racer on the hoverboards. To this day, it is one of the most requested games to get a remaster due to its unique mechanics and focus on style. Sonic Rivals was released later in the year on the PSP, and it's one of the most painfully average games ever. The premise of it is that you race another character to the end of a level, but there's not much to the mechanics of the game other than running and jumping. A harmless game at worst. These next two, however, are some of the most vile products Sega has ever sold to consumers. Sonic the Hedgehog Genesis, or Sonic Genesis for short, was a North American exclusive port of Sonic 1 on the Game Boy Advance that was awful due to screen crunch, janky physics, inconsistent frame rates, awful sound effects and music, popping, and many other issues. However, that didn't even compare to the clusterfuck that was Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. In short, the game was supposed to be Sonic's triumphant return to form after Shadow of 5 negative reception. Due to the game being rushed out the door and very troubled development history, however, the game would become known as Sega's biggest botch job, with awful gameplay mechanics and unpolished levels. The plot was also hot garbage, with it being split up into 3 campaigns. Sonic's story essentially ripped off every Mario plot ever, with him needing to save newcomer Princess Elise. Shadow's campaign focused on his battle with the devil, and newcomer Silver's campaign focused on saving his post-apocalyptic future. This was fortunately as low as the series ever got in terms of mainline games, but it cannot be understated how much of an impact the failure of this title had on the series. Remember how I said 06 had trouble development? Part of the reason that was the case was because Sega split their team in half to develop a game for the Wii, with the end result being Sonic and the Secret Rings. The game was set in the Arabian Nights and was the first of 2 storybook series games. Although there's some interesting ideas and concepts, the whole game fell apart because of a boneheaded decision to make movements tied to the Wii Remote's motion controls. Not much more needs to be said. On a more positive note, Sonic Rush Adventure was shipped out in 2007 to much more positive reception. It built upon the foundation that was so successful in the original game, but added sailing to the mix as a means of transportation between different islands. Marina Raccoon is a nuisance, and the story is kind of bland overall, but the rock-solid level design and mechanics made it a new venture that anyone could pick up and enjoy. Mario and Sonic would link up later in the year for the first of many Olympic Games titles on the Wii, which were essentially minigame collections based off Olympic sports. Rivals 2 also came out, and though adding no characters, is barely above the first in terms of quality. The DS version of Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games dropped pretty early in the year, and was decently received. A direct sequel to Sonic Riders, called Sonic Riders Zero Gravity, was Sonic's next spin-off title, however, with its focus being on anti-gravity hoverboarding. It did simplify a lot of mechanics present in the original game that made it so fun, but was a fun time nevertheless. Sonic Chronicles The Dark Brotherhood for the DS, on the other hand, was a pretty bad attempt at creating an RPG. The mechanics are awful, the control is super awkward due to the mandatory use of the touchscreen for everything, and the music sounds terrible. Sonic Team's next mainline title, however, was where they began to get back on their feet, with Sonic Unleashed adopting a whole new formula for modern Sonic stages. The plot is relatively simple, with Eggman shattering the earth with the power of the emeralds, awakening an entity known as Dark Gaia in the process, and turning Sonic into a werehog at night. With the drained emeralds and an amnesiac at his side, Sonic must search for 7 temples to restore the power of the emeralds and bring the world back together. The boost, originating from Sonic Rush, was fully translated into 3D, with the focus of the game being reaction-based challenges. This gameplay style got plenty of praise from fans of some of the wider media. However, Unleashed was bogged down by force medal collecting and the werehog, a slow, boring beat-em-up with stages that consistently overstayed their welcome. It should be noted that the Wii/PS2 got a different game with slightly different mechanics, although the core story and most of the HD version's issues still apply to it. Sonic would return to a mythical location in the second and last of the storybook games, Sonic and the Black Knight on the Nintendo Wii. The controls were greatly improved from Secret Rings, the characterization is some of the best in the series, and there are multiple playable characters, albeit limited. Black Knight isn't the most extraordinary game in the series, but it's got a lot of heart, which more and more people are beginning to appreciate it for. There was also a Winter Olympics game featuring Mario for both the Wii and the DS. Yay?
Baldy nose hair!
Kicking off the dreaded Meta Era was Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing by Sumo Digital. This released across pretty much every platform and was a more traditional kart racer, focused on emulating the Mario Kart experience with Sonic characters. Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1, however, was one of the most derided games in the series at the time. As the long-awaited sequel to the classic Mega Drive trilogy back in the day, it failed in almost every possible way in the eyes of the fans. the momentum was off, level themes were borrowed from its predecessors, the game was only 4 zones long, and Sonic had green eyes. 0 out of 10. Sonic Free Riders came out shortly afterwards and was a colossal failure, with the main gimmick of the game being that you had to use your entire body to control everything. It was also a first for the series, as none of the 4 kids' voice actors bar Eggman's voice actors survived the transition to the 2010s. Like most Connect games, it was plagued by many issues that caused it to be seen as an absolute bottom tier game. And unfortunately, this was the game that killed the Sonic Riders series. Thank you, Sonic Free Riders. Thankfully, the year ended on a high with Sonic Colors, a game where Sonic Team decided to learn from their mistakes and listen to feedback, as the entire game was based around the good half of Sonic Unleashed, with the main gimmick this time, the Wisps, being incorporated into the gameplay. Level layouts could feel inorganic at times, the story was pretty standard, and some of the jokes are so pitifully corny they make a child roll their eyes. But this was the first universally loved Sonic game in quite a while, which was all this game needed to be. It should be noted that there was a DS version of the game, which essentially acted as the third Rush game. It was pretty solid, being up there with the console version of the game for me in terms of quality. Sonic Generations was the only mainline release this year, and what a game it was. This was a title that tickled the nostalgia bones of every Sonic fan, as it reimagined classic locations with both a classic and modern spin on things. Chubby black-eyed Sonic from the 90s returned for classic 2D action, while modern Sonic tackled things like he did in Unleashed and Colors, boost gauge and all. The story was non-existent, that's pretty much the only thing I and many others could critique about the game. A must-own for anyone looking to get into the series. Oh, and there was another Olympics game featuring Sonic and Mario, both on the Wii and 3DS. Neat. Sonic 4 Episode 2 was released as the second and last installment in the Sonic 4 lineup of games, and they did improve a few things from the first, specifically the momentum. But at that point, the damage had already been done sadly, as people just wanted to move on from Sonic 4. And move on Sega did, because low sales cancelled the rest of the planned series. A sequel to Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, was released on most major consoles around, and this time around, the gimmick was that vehicles would transform as the race went on and the terrain changed, which led to a more dynamic feeling game in general. Sonic Lost World was the next mainline game, and they decided, for whatever reason, to completely switch up the gameplay formula. Sonic now had a run button, the spin dash was back, albeit completely different from prior entrances in 3D. There was now a new parkour move, Wisps were back for some reason, and the level design was rather Mario inspired, let's say. Wasn't the most popular game among Sonic fans, or critics for that matter. The year ended with yet another Mario and Sonic Olympic Games title, and there's not really much to say on those, so let's move on to... This was another dark year for Sonic, as this was the launch of the Sonic Boom brands, and with it came 2 games, Sonic Boom Shattered Crystal and Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric. Both were met with shockingly low review scores and sold shockingly. Rise of Lyric in particular got the most hit out of the 2 for just how boring and broken and slow the game really was. That's right, there were no games in 2015, the first time in ages Sonic had no releases of any sort during a calendar year. And the first game released after this brief hiatus was another Olympics game title. Fantastic. Anyways, a sequel to Sonic Boom Shattered Crystal was released on the 3DS, called Sonic Boom Fire and Ice, and it attempted to fix a lot of the issues that plagued the original game, like force separation and the pacing of certain moves. This wasn't mind-blowing or anything, but it was a pretty unoffensive game at worst and could even be pretty fun at its best. Sonic also got a level pack in LEGO Dimensions, with a whole campaign centered on him and his world. It was pretty interesting. Marketed as the true Sonic 4, Sonic Mania finally came out in 2017, and got almost nothing but unanimous praise from critics and fans. For good reason too, as this game was essentially a greatest hits collection of Sonic's classic 2D outings, with a faithful recreation of the feel that made the Blue Blur famous in the 90s. Unfortunately, it was followed up by Sonic Forces, one of the most painfully mediocre games I've ever played in my lifetime. The story went nowhere, classic Sonic felt like utter shite, the levels were bite-sized, and there was so much automation that you barely felt like you were in control of your actions. Critically, it got mediocre scores, but amongst the Sonic fanbase, this is still one of the most divided titles in the series to this day. The only real release this year was Sonic Mania Plus, an expansion of the original game that added Mighty the Armadillo and Ray the Flying Squirrel as playable characters for the first time since the 90s, and added this new Encore mode, which was a remixed version of already remixed stages. Nice additional content, but nothing groundbreaking. In 2019, Team Sonic Racing, a sequel to Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, was released on the 8th generation of consoles. This time, instead of transforming vehicles, the main gimmick was centered around teamwork and finishing high in races as a collective. Although fun, this wasn't as good as the prior entry, mainly because races were more static and the online service was substantially worse. To wrap up the year, we got the final Mario and Sonic game released on the Switch. They dropped this series for NFTs, by the way. Once again, we got another year of no console or handheld games, and this time it was probably due to the COVID pandemic. When we got out of this mini hiatus, the game we were given was a remaster of Sonic Colors, named Sonic Colors Ultimate. Like many Sonic remasters beforehand, this introduced a bunch of issues the original game never had, and even had seizure-inducing glitches at launch. Even after patches, this was a pretty bad remaster. We got another remaster in the form of Sonic Origins, which recreated the classic Sonic games from the ground up into a whole new engine. However, it, like many Sonic remasters, had baffling issues in the missions that really shouldn't have been a thing in the first place. However, it was still a serviceable remaster at the end of the day, which is all that mattered, I guess. The big release of the year, however, was Sonic Frontiers, the first ever open zone game in the series. This game was essentially a group of open sandboxes for the player to traverse as you collected various collectibles to advance the narrative, with various puzzles scattered across the islands to unlock more of the map. It aimed for spectacle above all with its climatic titan fights and was essentially a soft reboot in terms of characterization of the cast, as they attempted to course correct certain plot holes introduced in previous games. This game got such a positive reception among Sonic fans and was the title that put Sonic on the map again after years of mediocre releases. The future looked bright for the Blue Bird once again. The murder of Sonic the Hedgehog was a game I honestly didn't think was real when it was first revealed, but it was. This was a visual novel style game that got released as an April Fool's joke, and was unironically a decent time, as you must help figure out who killed Sonic in a murder mystery at Amy's birthday party. We also got a Sonic Mania-esque expansion pack for Origins in the form of Sonic Origins Plus, which added Amy, Knuckles and Sonic CD, because that wasn't a thing for some reason, and a few Game Gear titles. Sonic Frontiers also got a ton of support this year, as there was a roadmap of DLC throughout the year. The substantial content, however, came in the final update, which gave us an alternate take on the ending seen in Vanilla Frontiers, and gave us multiple playable characters in a mainline 3D game for the first time since Sonic 06 of all games. The update had many flaws, but still delivered on the fun factor, which is ultimately what matters most. The big new game of 2023, however, was Sonic Superstars, a 2.5D game which served as a sequel to Sonic Mania. It introduced the concept of emerald powers, from individual emeralds that is, gave us Trip the Sungazer as a character, and is the only Sonic game to this day to have fully integrated co-op in the game. And while the multiplayer feature was kinda bad, the game as a whole was pretty good and many fans enjoyed it for what it was, even if it was kinda playing it safe. Honorable mention to Sonic Dream Team, which supposedly feels like it could be a console game despite predominantly being made for Apple devices. I haven't played this, by the way. And that brings us to present day. After many highs and lows, it's clear that the Sonic series is once again on a positive trajectory, with Sonic X Shadow Generations looking impressive and the third movie in the Sonic Cinematic Universe coming out in December. I can only hope Sega and Sonic Team carry this momentum throughout the 2020s and deliver consistently good products for the fans. If you like this video, please make sure to like and subscribe, as it helps the channel out a ton and it shows me that you guys really enjoyed the content I put out. Heck, you could even comment with future video ideas if you wanted. Wink wink. Anyways, I'm out. Peace.